welcome to the Viewpoints podcast, brought to you by Equiture, the leading provider in public safety software and training. We are an international leader in public safety training and technology, with products geared toward providing tools to help responders stay safe and educated. For those of you who are new to our podcast, we offer these podcasts with a variety of guests geared toward public safety topics, as well as monthly webinars. Today on our show, we are exploring a topic not talked about much. Raising children is hard, but when you hear and see people having the worst days of their life and involving their children, it changes how you view your own children because you want to protect them. There is an old saying that preacher's kids and cop's kids are more likely to screw up than the rest of the teen population. And I wondered why that was. So I did some research on this in preparation for this podcast, and I found out that that was not true. But the challenge is preacher's kids and cops' kids are more in the public eye than other kids. So when they do misstep, it's a big deal. However, as servants in public safety, we hear our kids complaining about something that's happening at school. They didn't get to be on student council, or they didn't get the best designer jeans, and it may hit us wrong as parents. We've just taken a call where children were molested or kidnapped. We responded to a call where children were killed or initiated into gangs. So many things, and our reactions to our kids may not always be what they needed to be at that moment. Then we try and we set high standards so they don't end up like those kids that we come across and we hear on the phone. And then we try and shelter them and protect them all at the same time. To discuss this topic with personal experiences, we have a wide variety of public safety experts with us today on our panel. So let's jump right in. Recently retired, we have Tilly. She worked a variety of different positions within her agency and was promoted to a high level while raising two daughters, both now adults. We have Andy. She was promoted upward through her agency and is currently the director of 911 operations with her department, and she has a 4-year-old daughter. We have Al. He is a sergeant with his agency and has been assigned several specialty positions throughout his career. He has a teenage daughter, almost in her 20s. We also have a retired husband-wife duo. Dean worked several different positions and retired as a sergeant from his agency after 29 years, and Kathy retired after 34 years, working through the ranks to director from her 911 agency, and is currently working for OnStar. They have 2 children in their 20s. Lastly, we have Roger. He worked in law enforcement for 30 years, beginning at a sheriff's office, holding a variety of different positions before moving out of state where he worked for other agencies, including the interim chief position. He now works as an inspector for a railroad police agency. He has 4 adult children, 2 teenage children, and 9 grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to have each of you here today.
Thank you for having us.
Let me first start by asking each of you, were you in public safety when you had children? Andy, I know you weren't because I know how much experience you have, and I know you have a 4-year-old. But Kathy and Dean, were you in public safety when you first had children?
Yep, we both met through our agencies. I was in the dispatch center and he was in one of the police departments. And we dated for just a short period of time and ended up we're going to be married 27 years in 2 weeks. So, and then our daughter was about a year later. So.
Okay, congratulations. Great. What about you, Al?
Yes. I was in law enforcement prior to meeting my wife, and after we got married, we had our first child, a 19-year-old, and I have a 16-year-old also.
Okay.
Yeah, they've been immersed in law enforcement their entire life. So.
All right, and Tilly, I know you were not in law enforcement when you had your first child. That's correct?
That is correct. I was a firefighter at that time and I moved over to public safety afterwards.
All right. And Roger, you had children before you got involved in law enforcement.
Correct. I was doing kids when I first got into working at the jail at the sheriff's department.
So, for those of you who had children after you started in law enforcement, what changed for you in the job after you had children? So you were going along in your job, and then you had children. What in the job changed for you? And Andy, I'll start with you.
Get myself unmuted here. I had an interesting situation personally. I was working as an operations manager along with 3 others in my agency when I went out on maternity leave, and so then I had my daughter, and I came back to work. And as soon as I came back to work, they posted the job opportunity for the director of operations, and so I put in for it and was promoted to the position probably about a month after I came back from maternity leave. So for me personally, on one hand, I'm super fortunate. I feel that I'm not still working the floor and having shift work and mandatory overtime and sort of that uncertainty about my schedule. I have a little bit more of a flexible schedule, but I have a lot more responsibility. And so it was just trying to balance all that big responsibility um, on both sides of the house. And sort of learning and growing in my position while I was still kind of learning how to be a mom to an infant. So I feel like everything changed quick, and I just didn't really have time to take a breath. And then, of course, about 6 to 8 months after she was born, then COVID came along, and so I don't feel like I've taken a breath ever since. So.
Right. Kathy and Dean, what about you guys? You're going along, married, freshly married, newly married, kind of, and then you have kids. What in your careers changed for you after you had kids?
I was similar to Andy, that I got promoted shortly before I had my daughter, and we also implemented our EMD program at the same time, and I was teaching that class up until I gave birth. So I remember that specifically. But I went to a Monday through Friday job. My husband, I think he was on second at the time, which is the afternoon shift, and he ended up moving to the night shift, and he has a rotating schedule. So it was more about finding childcare, by making sure that we didn't have them in childcare every day, for 10, 12 hours a day. So we did a lot of sacrificing. I don't know if you want to chime in on what your scheduling was during that time.
So right after our daughter was born, I moved to third shift voluntarily. It just a lot better for our family. I could take the kids to doctor's appointments if needed. As they started getting older, start taking them to sporting events or other things that they were involved in. Having kids just helped us to make a lot of decisions that we did as a family. I would come home from work at about 7 in the morning. I'd only sleep till about noon and then go pick up the kids because we wanted to save money, because we wanted to build a house. It's the sacrifices that we made in the interest of our kids. But, the kids also helped along the way too with a career. You start to see different perspectives of things when you have kids. You can relate to the kids, and you do take the child involved incidents a little bit more serious when it's you picture your own kids involved in something bad. So it was definitely a benefit. Lack of sleep was a huge sacrifice for a lot of years. A lot of years I don't remember, just because I was so tired all the time. But we made those choices, and we lived with them. And finally, I could go to day shift after about 19 years.
Right. Al, what about you?
Kind of a similar situation where, well, I think first you were asking about the transition or getting adjusted to have kids. I was really just uh, transitioning into being married at the time. And then 3 years later, we had our first child. It was a very fluid situation for me. I had worked afternoons for a long time and really liked the afternoon shift. But when the kids came along, I made this adjustment. I think I did 4 years straight on midnights just because it did work better for our schedule. My wife was working days and I was working afternoons. And as they got a little bit older, I was kind of like on a swing shift for a little while. And but I still could get them from school, sleep for a little bit, and be at work at like 8 o'clock at night. So yeah, it was an adjustment. I think I'm a little too old for that now, but yeah, it was part of my career. And, I think I'm better as a result of experience in that. So
Okay, thanks. How about you, Tilly?
For me, that was part of why I transitioned to law enforcement because being a firefighter, there were 24-hour shifts, and it was too difficult to try and plan a life around being gone every third day from my new child. So I went into law enforcement because at the time our agency had 12-hour shifts. So at least it was only half of the time, and I took like the others, I took night shift because it allowed me to do things during the day with them, and they could stay with my mom at night, and so I had a good support network with all of that. I was close to family and everything, but I realized that like the others, sleep was something that was quickly sacrificed, and you learn to eat a lot faster, sleep a lot faster, and value those 10-minute showers that you manage to sneak in on the occasion. But yeah, it was a huge adjustment trying to plan all that, and if one of them gets sick, trying to figure out how to navigate that in a 12-hour block. That sort of thing. So yeah, it was very challenging trying to manage that, and I am not a night person by any means. So switching from days to nights was extremely difficult for me.
I understand that. Roger, what about you? So, Roger, you already had children when you got into public safety. Um, did public safety change your perception of like being faced with different kind of calls that involved children? Oh, I think we lost him. So for me, I worked nights. For a while, I was a single parent, and I remember being so tired because I got put on midnight. And I remember we had a cuckoo clock, and I would count when the cuckoo clock for 6 o'clock. I would start counting at 7, and the kids were little, so I would count at 7, so they would think they had to go to bed. At 7 o'clock, I would count 1, and um, anyway, they would think that it was bedtime earlier than it was. Um, as you grew in your career and your children grew up, do you think your attitude changed toward parenting?
I can start answering that. I can say definitely mine did. I know that I didn't necessarily hover more, but I became more aware of things, more aware of people in my physical circle, the people I let into my life, how I trusted people, and even how I spoke to people. My attitude shifted, especially when I was in corrections. Unintentionally, it caused me to be a lot more cynical about humanity than I would perhaps have been. Um, and so I think some of the lessons that I taught both of my daughters early on were more geared towards, um, not necessarily not trusting people, but being more cautious of blindly trusting people, about questioning motives and learning to understand and read people a little better than perhaps, had I been in any other environment, I'm not sure they would have been quite so questioning, because for their whole lives, their circles of friends were tight. When they formed friendships, they formed very tight bonds because they didn't just let anybody into their circle. And I think it helped keep them from getting hurt to some extent. But I often wonder, were they deprived of some of that because of my unintentional cynicism about humanity at times?
So they're older now. Do they have that same cynicism that they kind of watched in you?
Um, no, the older they got, the more they understood the reasons behind what I told them, and allowing them to help grow and develop into who they were. But I don't see that in them now. They do form bonds fairly easily, even as adults, but they're tight bonds. So I don't see them being cynical, but I do see them being realistic, where perhaps once they may have been more, I don't want to say optimistic, blindly optimistic, or rose colored glasses. They are more realistic about people and their motivations. And as long as as adults, they've learned to accept some of those things in the people they surround themselves with. So I don't think they have a cynicism. I think they have more of an awareness, is the word I would use.
Okay. Well, Roger, let's circle back around to you. So you already had children when you got involved in public safety. Um, were you surprised at what you were faced with public safety? I mean, bringing up children, was it different than you thought it would be for the kind of calls you were faced with, and did it hit you differently than you thought?
Um, so I had family members who were also in law enforcement. My grandfather was a sheriff and justice of the peace back in the 50s in Colorado, and so I always kind of went enforcement. So when I got into law enforcement and having kids, it was like my dream job. I really didn't give much thought about what it was going to be like raising kids and being in that line of work. Um, but some of the things that you do see in law enforcement does cause you have some different reactions and make some concerns over what your kids are going to see, and how they are going to be exposed to things. And so there were some things that, as they got older, I saw some things that were different that I probably did that I may not have done if I wasn't in law enforcement, because I've been in law enforcement for most of their lives. So uh, kind of hard to know what I would have done differently. But uh, I think there was some things that, like being in knowing and seeing some of the people that I had to deal with in the jail, not wanting the kids to grow up to be like some of those folks, or be around some people like that. I think it changed, and I would be a little more strict with them on things than I may have been otherwise.
Thank you. Um, Kathy and Dean, did your children ever have any funny contact with law enforcement growing up? Do you know what I mean by that? Like, were they ever contacted by anyone you worked with uh, for speeding or anything like that?
The only thing that I can think of that happened is my daughter got in 2 accidents when she just turned 16. But other than that, they were good. They didn't get in any trouble, and we weren't overprotective. We weren't overly strict, but they knew what the guidelines were. They knew what our positions were in our county and city. And they made good choices. And yeah, I can't think of any.
No, I think we're pretty well known within our county. We're, I guess, a face that most people know in our communities. on the law enforcement side. So yeah, my daughter didn't get a ticket for one of the accidents, and she probably should have. But I think we never held back what we did with our kids. Obviously when they're younger, you don't tell them about all these horrific calls that we call and that we go to. But as they got older, they got to experience some of the emotional things that I've experienced on some of the calls, because they can tell coming home, that I was a little bit different about things. But we talked about it, and it actually helped me out, and they understood that. And our son is now a police officer too, so he understands, what Dad was like, because he's doing that now. So it was a pretty good help for us, and now for his career.
I mean, you look at that and you know all the great and the not so great things about your career. When your son said, I want to be in law enforcement too, was that a proud moment, but I wish he'd pick a different career, or were you really happy with his choice?
Well, I tried to get him to be a fireman like everybody else, but he wouldn't listen. He tried the fire explorers, and next thing you know, he wants to be a police officer. And I didn't discourage him from doing that. I loved my job, and although I would have thought maybe a path a little bit different than mine might be something for him, but it's really what he wanted to do, and I couldn't talk him out of it. He went to college for it. And
the times are different now, though, than when you started.
Yes.
So that's the only thing I worry about is just all the anti-police stuff, and one wrong decision and your whole life is over. One split-second decision and you're labeled, or So that's what I worry about, is that. But he wants to change the face of police work and be honorable, and so I guess can't blame him for that. So.
Right. Al, what about you? Have your kids have you ever gotten a call from a coworker or said, hey?
Fortunately, I have not. My daughter has been stopped by the local police once, and it wasn't them, but she told me immediately when she got home that she was stopped, and thank God she didn't get a ticket, but just a warning. But now that my daughters have really had any negative or which we call in roadside interviews much, so I'm fortunate for that, and I know my daughters are really interested in law enforcement. I really didn't encourage it. Not that I just wanted them to seek what they wanted to do, and one is into journalism, the other one is into architecture. So, where they go from there, they seem to have a passion for it. But we try to expose them to a lot to find out where their passion lies, and it's like they found it. So we'll see how that develops. Part question to that.
No.
Okay.
You got it. Right. That's far and away from law enforcement. Those careers.
Yeah, I didn't necessarily discourage it, but I didn't encourage it either. I wanted them to, and I don't know if they really had the passion for it. So we tried to expose them to a lot of different areas to kind of find out what they're passionate about. And, it seems to have worked so far. So we hope it continues to progress like
that. Tilly, I know you have a story to share about your daughter's contact with your department.
I do. They both of mine grew up obviously knowing the people that I worked with and everything, and so because they were there from the time they were very small, and about the time my oldest had just started driving, I started having the conversations with them about appropriate behavior and how you interact with an officer when they pull you over, even if it's one how to handle themselves and the do's and don'ts of it. And I was in the middle of something one day, and my phone rings, and it's her number. And I answered, and it was this very, very confused sounding officer on the other end of the line. And he identified himself and told me why he was calling me. And he was from one of the sister agencies, not my agency, but a neighboring one. And he called me. The reason he was calling was he was trying to figure out how to handle her because he had pulled her over for her taillight being out. Something super simple. He just wanted to let her know. And she absolutely lost her mind. And she says, am I going to be booked in for this? My mom's going to find out about it. She's having a meltdown because she immediately knew mom was going to be told, and it was something where she just lost her mind. I'm not 100% sure, but he was trying to ask me how to help calm her down, and I finally got her talked down. And she said that she knew he was going to arrest me because cops' kids should know better. That's what she kept saying. I should have known better, and that sort of thing. So it made me chuckle. Both myself and the officer that were with her, it made us chuckle because while it was funny for us, I know it was. I don't want to use the word traumatic, but it was something that deeply impacted her because she was thinking that way. So when we got home, we had a conversation, and then a very good friend of mine, gave her the rundown again of the do's and don'ts. And I guess a few weeks later, she's driving down the road and she gets pulled over for one of my own officers that's pulled her over. And so she ends up getting a ticket about it and everything else. And, you know, he says, what I got a phone call to check the notes in the call, and it says the driver has both arms out the window and is sobbing. So apparently she went to the complete further extreme, and she's hanging out the driver's side window and everything. And I mean, you can't help but laugh about that. So it got to where, after all that was said and done, my a lot of the guys I worked with would make it a point because they recognized her car and stuff. They'd be on her route to work or to school, and they would just pop their lights at her or blip her with the siren just to harass her a little bit. And I was constantly getting messages like, "Mom, would you please quit having your friends do this to me?" And it's embarrassing when I have friends in the car and stuff. But it became kind of a running joke, and in a weird way, it helped her relax to know, that she was allowed to be human and make mistakes. But yeah, she does not have a lead foot anymore either because she never wanted to get another ticket after that adventure.
Oh, yeah. Our oldest son is we have older kids and then we have the younger kids. He had a lead foot. He dropped my name, which I didn't like at all. Not at all. But I blame his dad for the lead foot because Roger drives a lot faster than I do. All right. Andy, I know your daughter isn't going to have any of those contacts yet. But,
No.
Right.
It makes me wonder sometimes, but yes, no, she's good.
Right. So, when you think about, so you're hearing this, and I'm sure you know other people. How do you think you're going to feel, because you're coming into it more with your eyes wide open, when you have to take that call, or when your dispatch center takes the call, and it's maybe a friend of your daughter's, or something like that?
Yeah, I hadn't thought too much about that. I was thinking while everybody was talking about how she's just kind of inadvertently been a little insulated because she goes to daycare, but it's a small daycare. She doesn't go to school yet. We have a smaller family, immediate family, so I haven't even really honestly put too much thought into it, but I do often think about when she starts going to school. I find myself having a lot of anxiety every time I hear about something happening at a school, like the mass shootings. Of course, I would always empathize, but it's sort of hitting me a little bit differently. And then, just knowing that whether it was a friend or if it was in the school district or something like that, that I'll probably know beforehand, and always that internal struggle with how much you can share or how much is appropriate to share. And that's always been easy, but with the added layer that, you know, this is your kid that you're trying to take care of. You know, you're going to have to, it's just going to have to be something that I really think about, you know, when it comes up, for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Roger, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Obviously, I already know the answer to this question. Did you ever respond to a call involving your child's friends or your child's friend's family?
Yes. Hardest calls on a lot of with the SWAT team and a lot of calls with the sudden infant death syndromes that are tough to handle as officers, especially when you have kids. But probably deal with was responding to one of our daughter's friends whose dad was wanting to commit suicide. We had looked for him for quite a long time, couldn't find him. The call came in where he had put a hose from his exhaust pipe into the cab of his truck along Mountain Road in Colorado. And by the time we got there to look for him, he had already left the scene. So we searched, went to his residence, tried to find him there. The firefighters who had been on scene, the ambulance crew, the other death. After about 45 minutes and we couldn't find him, they had all left. I was still patrolling around to try to look for him. Came across this individual, pulled in behind his truck. He was pulled into a vacant lot. When I pulled in, I radioed in where he was, that I'd found him. I was making contact with him. I could actually see him trying to cut his while he was sitting in the cab of his truck. From there, I still do not remember my car door. I don't remember putting the microphone down. I don't remember drawing my weapon, because he got out of the truck and started coming back towards me. So the next thing I know, I've got my gun pointed at him, and he stopped 15 feet away from me, and the only thing he said to me was, "Damn it, Roger, I wish it wasn't you." The only thing going through my head was, how am I going to explain to this young lady that I had to kill her father? Because his intent was to commit suicide by cop. Luckily, he turned around and I was able to disarm him, get the knife out of his hand, try to stop the bleeding, and then get help to him. But that was the toughest call I've ever been on.
And that was a tough call. That would have been a tough call anyway, but because we knew his daughter, and she was such good friends with our daughter, you know, so when we talk about parents and public safety, you know, these are things that people don't think about, you know, when they think about, you know, dispatchers, you know, dispatching that call and the officers responding and having to deal with things like that, right? You know, they don't think about that. And a lot of times, like Andy, like you said, you hadn't really given it a lot of thought, kind of is in the back of your mind. But teachable moments. We've got guests listening to our podcast, and I want people to understand that when you're going through these thoughts and you're struggling with things, you're not alone. Each of you here on our panel today, you know, you've gone through, you've had crazy things going through your head, and you're not alone, right? So I wanted you to share your stories. That's why you're here. Kathy and Dean, so you grew up or you worked in a smaller community. Did you ever have anyone come to you and say, hey, what about this person? Do you guys know this teenager that was, associated maybe with your kids? Did you ever have to deal with anything like that?
I don't think so. I mean, I think law enforcement wise, you've had stuff where some of the kids in high school maybe got arrested, or parents of the kids were arrested for domestics or drunk driving or whatever it is. But we've never had our kids associated with, problem kids that they were really good friends with. But I mean, we've heard some of their friends, they had a high school student that they went to school with that passed away, and I, working at the 911 center, would hear all of the calls and would critique them and hear all of those. So I knew more than Dean because he worked in the city. But our kids, we went to we live in a different community, so I dealt with all those phone calls and stuff. So I would hear stuff and know about stuff and couldn't share that with them. But it's like you said, you want to use it as a learning experience and just kind of in general tell them not to do these things or not to do that. Right. I don't think we were lucky that we didn't have those issues.
No. Just a couple of years ago, I had an interaction with a friend of my daughter's who was dealing with substance abuse, and she was involved with somebody else who was doing the same thing. And when I had contact with her, I tried to use that connection of my daughter to try to get her to admit what she was doing. It was pretty obvious from my professional eye that she was under the influence of that particular drug. I just knew it. But even with that connection that she had with my daughter, she didn't want any help, and so I tried to use that to my advantage a little bit with my daughter's relationship with her, and it didn't work.
But then her mom even called you a short time after that because they all did karate together and things like that. So she even called Dean to try to help her get her daughter back because, I mean, it was, heroin or what? Yeah, it was bad stuff.
It seemed like doing, it was probably heroin or a narcotic.
But yeah, so that was kind of a helpless thing, and I don't know. Like, she looks at you and she remembers you and she knows you, but yeah, the drug is too strong.
Right.
The girl that my daughter grew up with, I mean, she's kind of a shell of herself. So, I knew that. And, she was going to make her own choices, unfortunately.
Right. Chili, you have narcotic-wise or things like that, and the agency you work with, were you ever faced with anything like that where you ran into people your kids knew?
Unfortunately, yes. I was assigned to a unit that was dealing with. We were a specialized task force set up because where I was, there was a rash of deaths of teenagers. There was 13 out of this one particular graduating class, and it was traced back to. Long story short, it was traced back to some heroin again. And so they set up a task force, and I was part of the task force, and we were trying to get ahead of this and having very little success. And then every once in a while, my girls would tell me stuff they were hearing at school or whatever, because by that point they understood the importance of what we were doing. So, if they would hear whatever rumors or whatever, they would, talk to me. And I was very grateful they were able to talk to me openly. And we went on a particular call, and unfortunately, two of the young ladies that were involved, one of them passed away, and she was somebody that my daughters had associated with. She was not a trouble child or anything, but she had gotten in with the wrong crowd, as some kids do, and unfortunately, it cost her her life out of it. And it was really difficult for me to balance that with, again, I've heard others say it. You can't go home and talk about that. You can't, you know, I got comments like so and so didn't show up to school that day, the next day, or whatever, or hey mom, do you know why so and so hasn't been there? I'm really worried about him. And you can't talk about the calls, but there's only so much you can share, and it would frustrate them at times because they knew more than I could let on, and it was very difficult for me to kind of balance the knowledge of what I had with wanting to ease their minds and knowing I couldn't. So yeah, there was some challenges with that, especially like I said with narcotics, and the whole heroin thing was really challenging for me to deal with. I didn't spend very long in it because there were far too many youths, and you can't save them. So um, yeah, it's definitely challenging, especially when you're looking in the eyes of your kids that are the same age. It's very, very difficult.
When our older children were teenagers, one of their friends' parents approached us and asked us about a young man that he was a known meth dealer at the time, and he was currently dating their daughter. And so, the question was, well, what do you know about him? And oh gosh, you say, right? I mean, in law enforcement, that was really an awkward position to be put in. Um, so I wouldn't answer, but I ended up just saying, well, I wouldn't want my child to date him because I didn't know. I'm not very good at those kind of in-your-face questions. I don't tend to answer quickly. Well, anyway, it ended up costing our child that friendship because the parent went back, and I never did find out exactly what she said to her daughter. But and then even the parent ended up being upset with us because her relationship with her daughter went from bad to worse. So somehow that ended up being our fault. Um, Al, have you had any interactions with non-public safety parents who were really naive about their children?
Yes, not necessarily. I think not necessarily anyone that I really knew that in my community, because majority of my work is kind of taken. I'm in a major metropolitan area, and where I live, my assignments are usually several jurisdictions over from uh, where I reside. So, but I was assigned to our special investigation section for a few years in homicides and non-fatal shootings, and unfortunately, I've had to deal with parents who have lost kids to violence. And through our investigations, uh, having to walk a tightrope, a fine line when you want to give information because they want closure to all of this, and as you're trying to conduct this investigation and give them some closure and ultimately hope that there's a prosecution of the offender. But in one case, I know for sure that um, it was a homicide, a young man, a teenager, and through our investigation, we found out that he was one of the aggressors, a shootout, and he got shot. He and another guy were trying to kill someone, and you know, before I could really confirm that, I couldn't tell them that. But when I gave them that news, they just could not believe that uh, their son would do that, and were really pressing me as well as the prosecutor, like to charge or do more to uh, charge or make sure there's some type of punishment for the other young man that was responsible for his death, and which it was turned out to be self-defense, but just dealing with them for a year or more after the fact was quite difficult. I mean, it was having to do that, and you find out things that you really don't want to hear about your kid. So that was a bit difficult. And fortunately, they weren't related to me or were friends of ours or in our circle, but they were a parent, and I did have compassion, and we did have something in common because we have children together. And I couldn't imagine that being the victim of that sort of situation myself. So yeah, it was a bit difficult to deal with, and trying. Um, in no way did I want to dismiss them, although there were times that I didn't have time to really deal with them. I kind of felt like, hey, I'm a bit obligated. I'll sit and listen as long as I can. So,
That probably was really helpful for them, just to have someone listen.
yeah, I had a good friend who was a mentor. One of my sergeants when I was younger, working roles, he always kind of taught me, hey, you never know what people are going through, or put yourself in a position. And he always watched him and how he treated people, and I tried to do the same thing when I was in those situations.
I love mentor stories. I'm going to come back to that. Andy, your position, when people find out that you're in 911, do you find yourself having to talk to them, or are they really naive about what happens with children? Do they like live in a glass bubble, rose-colored bubble? Do you find yourself thinking, oh my gosh, what are you thinking?
Yeah. I mean, I think, regardless of whether or not, before I was a parent and after I was a parent, I think that's a general common thing that we find. I think now, I think my circle's just expanded. Like I mentioned that she's kind of insulated and we don't have a lot. But that being said, we do take her to gymnastics and swimming and those sorts of things, and you start talking to the parents, and naturally it comes up every time. Well, what do we do? And so then that starts the same conversation that it usually does for any of us, that when people find out. So it hasn't gotten really weird or anything like that with people that I've talked to. But I think, maybe naive, and maybe certainly naive about what 911 is and how it works. And there's a lot of curiosity around it, I find.
Our community where we lived in the mountains, they just couldn't believe there was even crime.
Yeah.
Oh, do people really need you? Well, yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
So I have just a couple more questions. What kind of training throughout your career? And this is kind of all of you. You could just take turns and bouncing in and out. What kind of training, advanced training, experience throughout your career did you receive that do you feel made you like hyper vigilant, or maybe you didn't receive any? For example, when I went through the missing children training at NICNIC, Colleen Nick specifically, places I thought were safe were no longer safe for me, for my kids. And I know that was really hard on the kids because I was constantly, oh no, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that, you can't do that. But I felt pretty powerless to stop the vigilance that I felt. Did any of you experience anything like that?
For me, the missing and exploited children's training, all of that, and especially when trafficking started becoming a big topic, a lot of the trafficking training really, especially as they got to be older teenagers and dating and all of this, and with social media and their online presence increasing, it very much made me far more hyper vigilant, and like you, I didn't necessarily like it, but I felt helpless to stop it because to do anything other than what I was doing felt like I would be doing them a disservice and not protecting them the way I should. So yeah, those kind of trainings were extremely difficult for me to kind of keep it at bay as much as others, because some of the trainings you have to have them, and we're all realistic enough to understand them. In mental health, it's an awareness thing, but those particular trainings made you just want to go home and hold them tight and never ever let them out of the bubble and out of your sight ever.
Right.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think right now we have a really big fentanyl problem up here, and so it's out there. Where I thought it was just a rumor, but getting training and information on some of it that's made to look like candy. Um, you know, uh, Hearing really frequently, unfortunately, about kids dying or going into cardiac arrest that are in the house with it, just from exposure. That's made me super hyper vigilant. Like if I take her to the park or something like that, and she bends over to pick something up, I lose my mind because I feel like I don't know what it is, and so there's that. And then I think that will lead for me to have a little bit more anxiety about sending her to someone's house without seeing it from my own eyes, because it's not just a thing that happens in the big city. It's not just a thing that we're not sure if it's really happening or not. It's really happening, and I hear about it almost every day, unfortunately. And it's I think that's what's really been getting to me lately.
Right.
Jump in as we can.
Go ahead, Al.
I think there are a couple of things, a couple of trainings. One in particular, I've been through homicide school with our department, and I went to an out-of-state homicide 3-day training, and it was probably the most intense training with the videos, very rare videos of crime scenes and interrogation of really demented individuals. And it really got me thinking. I was out of state, and I had to call home a couple times just to check on my family to make sure nothing was going on. And it really made me come on like, we need to have this house secure at night. We were seeing things of people sneaking in houses and serial killers and stuff like that. So that kind of got me on edge. And I early in my career, I was an accident investigator, so I worked a lot with the reconstruction team. And my kids were much smaller then, so they weren't at the driving age. But now that they're driving, I think back on all the investigations I've done with crashes, and I always, I want to be, I'm happy when it comes to driving safely. I see how most people don't realize that fatal car crashes are one of the most violent things that can happen. And I always think about my kids, because police acts, fatal fatalities involving teenagers. So maybe I'm a little bit overboard at times, but I feel that if I'm not expressing what some of the dangers are, I'm not doing my job. So I want to keep my family as safe as possible.
I've got an example for you.
So I don't know if there's any. Oh, go ahead.
Everybody mandatorily in my agency went to some training, and actually the trainer came to us and was sponsored by our police department. It was a chief from Illinois who put on, it's called Breach Point training, and he basically told his story about how his job consumed him and how it changed him and how he would bring that home to his family, and the effects of what we in public safety deal with really on a daily basis. What we're bringing back home and how we deal with that. And I had the opportunity to see him several times, but he really put in perspective of really how our profession changes us, and that's for 911, that's for law enforcement, that's corrections. And after about the third time I saw him, things started to click for me that it had changed me, so much so that I even apologized to my kids, because I could tell that I was bringing things home. I was the bear a lot of times. Sometimes it's back to what we talked about earlier about not sleeping a lot. But all the things that you see, really the the alpha personality that we have to have at work, we're bringing home. And I apologize to my kids for the way I acted for many years, because I was that bear, and they said that they never realized it. Well, I did. So I was really thankful for that training, and all of our officers still mandatorily go to that training. Even our newest of officers will receive that training within about their first year of employment. And that training has come around. Our church even sponsored this chief to come in and provide something on a community level, because he provides this training not only to officers but to families and the community on how this life and public safety affects us, and how it can affect all those people that are around us.
It's funny that you said that, because something that both of my daughters have always mentioned is something that I found very simple that I do. And it's going into a restaurant, for example. I'll never sit with my back to a door. I think most everybody here, I see people nodding. So, it's not even something I consciously do, but you're looking for that route of egress, and you position yourself to be in the best position. It would drive my kids crazy if they happened to be sitting there and I would have them move or whatever, slide over or whatever. It would frustrate them at times, or even I remember going to Disney once when they were kids and looking around the same way, and it was one of those things that you start doing subconsciously, and it does change you. And what's interesting for me now that I am in a position of having recently retired, I feel some of those things. Perhaps I'm letting it go just a little bit to where I feel like I can breathe, and that's the only way to describe it. I don't have to constantly be looking over my shoulder all the time. So it does inherently change who you are and how you interact with the world around you, even in normal subconscious ways that you don't even see.
So I'm going to add a little perspective on that. I agree with the brought up and some of those trainings I've gone to, including the benefit of joining our search and rescue team and doing some of the trainings with them. Seeing some of the things that people get involved in, what makes you more concerned for what if my kids are out here playing around in the mountains and fall into this river, kind of thing, or try to go swimming, like dive calls where a kid is trying to swim across just the river there, but it's right from an outlet of a dam, and they end up drowning because the current's so strong. And those kind of things make you really concerned for your kid's safety. I'm not sure that there's any specific training that stuck out that are concerned than just being involved in law enforcement, and seeing the things that we have to deal with on a daily basis, seeing how families are. That brings for you. So I'm not sure that there's any specific training that helped raise that concern, or just being in. Dean talked about with that training he went to about just our life in 911 and public safety. I think living it kind of make concern for your kids and your family's safety.
I think that's a really good point. I've been retired for 2 years now. I've been out of the P staff, and Roger took our 14-year-old to a friend's house maybe a month, 6 weeks ago, and it's a new friend, and he dropped her off and told me, "Oh, I dropped her off." I said, "Well, did you go in? Did you meet the parents? Did you see inside the house?" And he's like, "No, I just dropped her off at the driveway." And I'm like, "Oh no! You mean you didn't say anything to the parents?" So I'm not sure. Tilly, I'm glad that you feel that easy. I'm not feeling it yet. Maybe it'll get there. Well, I am very appreciative of your time today in our podcast. If you had the opportunity to provide training to a new dispatcher or a police officer, what kind of encouragement would any of you can speak up, would you offer them regarding bringing up a child as a public safety servant?
For me, I think I would try and let them know that it's worth it. I'm fortunate that one of my daughters, instead of going to law enforcement, she chose to take the things she had learned and seen, and she wanted to do more to help. So she's now a licensed clinical social worker that specializes in juvenile and adolescent trauma therapy, because she knew the calls that were always the hardest for me were those involving children, and the sense of frustration and helplessness to how do you ever repair the damage for these kids. So she took that and internalized it and became somebody that can take it into the future and help these kids be healed and be whole again. So for me, I think I would try and let them know that, we've survived 100% of our worst days so far. All of us here have. It's a heck of a track record. We can all be proud of it. And we've made a difference in people's lives. And the next generation will feel that and see that. And it is worth it. Even on the tough days, it is worth it.
I think I would add to that and find things to train people to do or fun things to do. I think one of the memories that are is when I helped to chaperone one of the dances. Not officially, I was working that night by the dance, and while one of our daughters was dancing on the floor, shining a flashlight out there on him to make sure that she knew Dad was there and watching. It was it's something that's been a long stand and the flashlight and being protective of the girls while they're dancing. I think it's something that kids look back now and they actually kind of laugh about that and have fun with it. So if we can find a way to have fun, this job is rewarding. This job is worth it. Um, we deal with a whole lot of negative with today's feeling on law enforcement and the negative look that people are casting on. Um, swing back the other way. But I think if we could find a way to bring that joy back into law enforcement, that it's a fun job, it's a good job, it's rewarding, and there's plenty of benefits. That would be a training that I would try to provide.
I think for me, I mean, I would piggyback on the kind of training that Dean was talking about, or some of the training that I've been to with a similar presenter, um, and that's just to not let you want to be part of the team and have the camaraderie and have the family atmosphere, but there's a certain point where it does consume you, and to try to balance that and remember that your family and your kids, um, that's the real part of your life, and so just trying to keep that balance and not spending time and energy at work getting wrapped around the axle about things that you can't change and letting that bleed over at home.
I was going to say for balance too is you have to take care of yourself. You have to have outside interests. You have to be healthy mentally and physically. Kind of a mistake that we made is like we gave our whole life to our departments, and everybody's replaceable, as you know. So they moved on quickly. We did not so much. It's what, 8 months since I left, and I'm finally starting to feel normal and not worry when I know a storm's coming. And staffing levels, I still am connected with people there, but he retired in January. In Wisconsin, it's same as Michigan. It's not fun to be locked up in your house for 2 months. So have outside interests, volunteer, do stuff. There are good people out there, and it's hard not to get jaded, but there are good people out there. So, do you have anything?
Yep. I agree.
Good answer.
Smart man.
To add to all that?
I always tell them where to go when we work together, and I tell them what to do at home.
Oh, I heard that.
Been fine for me because
Yeah.
when you're always making a lot of decisions,
Dispatchers make the most decisions, though.
yeah, but when you're making
We have to
decisions
know a lot
all the
about
time,
everything.
I'd rather her make all those decisions like dinner and all those types of
But
things. And
after being on the phone all day and stuff like that, who wants to be on the phone? So,
Right.
as you can see.
Al, do you have anything to add?
I think I would have to agree the balance portion of it. Just try, because for so many years I've experienced a lot of trauma when we were working, but painting margin in your life where, because you stress a lot, and having some other outlet outside of your job to be able to provide that balance is what I would encourage my kids to do, as well as their activities. I mean, just try to be well balanced. I mean, I think it'll take you a long way.
And remember to laugh. That was a good point, Roger. Fun. Remember to laugh because it does help.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you again, all of you, for joining our podcast. For our guests, we hope you enjoyed today's podcast. Next month, we will have the children of public safety joining us and seeing what it was like to grow up in a public safety family. So it'll be maybe a completely different view than their parents.
Right.
So thank you again, everyone, and everyone have a great day.
Thanks for having us. I will make sure that that next session recorded because I would like to hear what my daughter has to say. So.
Bye, everyone.